Hey, it's Cody. I'm on day 115 of the Odin project, and I'm still working on my final JavaScript project. Today, I added a delete button that'll allow the user to delete an attribute from their lexicon. Let's take a look at the screen. So this feature is going to be for this lexicon table within the view lexicon component. The user can select an attribute, like right here, you'll see that I'm going to click that attribute, and then up here, we see an edit button and a delete button appear. And that delete button and the processes, systems that allow that to function properly are what I created today. In order to make this a functional delete button, I needed to be able to update the state of the view lexicon component to remove the attribute from the lexicon, and in addition to that, be able to delete the lexicon from the database. So first thing we're going to look at here is the sensorylexicon.js file that I have here, and this is going to be the sensory lexicon object that is being used to render this table. Needed to add a method to this object that will delete the attribute that's specified from the sensory lexicon. So we have delete attribute by ID, so we're going to use the attributes ID, which is the same thing that we're going to use to delete it from the database. So we'll use that key attribute ID to then filter over the attributes array, which is within this sensory lexicon object. We're going to filter out any attributes that have a get attribute ID that is equal to attribute ID. So here it's going to return an array of all the values that are not equal to the attribute ID that we're filtering out. We're going to then set that equal to the attributes within this object, and we're going to set the date modified. So I actually did have to write another test for this because this is one of my core objects that I'm using for this website. So I did that as well. Nothing too fancy. I'm not going to go into it because there's a lot that I got done today. But that's for updating the sensory lexicon object. So that's going to be relevant for state. We'll see that a little bit later on. We'll come back to this within the view lexicon component. Next, we're going to take a look at delete attribute data. So this is actually the function that's going to be utilized to delete the attribute from the Firestore database. So fairly straightforward here. It's just this async function, and then I'm using the methods from the Firebase Firestore API to actually delete the document from the attributes collection. And we see that attribute ID is being used to get the document from the database. So pretty straightforward. Next, we're going to look at the system that I developed for actually allowing the user to delete the attribute that they've selected. So first off, we have a delete attribute button clicked state that is initially set to false. That'll be relevant for our modal, which I'll show you in just a minute. But the key function here is this callback function that we have, delete attribute, where we're going to use the delete attribute data for the database, and then also that delete attribute by ID method within the lexicon to update the lexicon. And then we're going to set the lexicon state, unselect the attribute, and also set the delete attribute button clicked to false. That way we get rid of these buttons over here. We also shut down the modal, and we update both the local state and also the database state. Let's go over here and take a look at what this looks like. So we have an attribute selected. I can select another one, so like floral here, and then I can click delete, and then this modal will come up, and I can click confirm, and we'll see that floral is no longer there, and the edit buttons over here are no longer there as well. We check the database, the sensory attribute will also be deleted from the database. So this is updating our local state and our database. So let's take a look at that modal and also some of the logic down in the rendering. So let's go down here. So the most important piece of the rendering for the deletion of an attribute is this right here. This is going to be the displaying of the warning modal when the delete button is clicked. So delete attribute button clicked is that state that I mentioned above. It's initially set false. Once that button is clicked, which we'll see right here, toggle delete attribute button click, then this warning modal will render. The toggle delete attribute button click was a function that was above. It was right below what I just explained. Essentially, it's going to check the delete attribute button clicked state. If it is set to true, it'll set it to false. If it was set to false, it'll set true. So it's just toggling back and forth there. So a user clicks that delete button over here, and the warning sign will come up because the delete attribute button clicked state will be true. We see that this warning modal has several props. It has a name prop, sensory object type, function to run on confirm, and an exit function. Let's take a look at what that warning modal looks like. So our name is going to be our sensory attribute name, and that's what we see here. Fatty is selected currently, and that's going to be rendered down here with this highlight attribute. We'll see that we have a background. Just to go down to the JSX real quick, we have a background, we have a warning modal. So the background is this grayed out portion. The warning modal itself is the white space, and then we have the text and the button. So a confirm button and a cancel button. The sensory object type is going to occur right after the name, just to specify that deleting an attribute, not a reference, because we're going to make a system for references as well. And then for each modal button, the function to run on confirm property is going to be set for the confirm on click event, and for the cancel button, the on click event is going to be the exit. We go back up here, we'll see that our exit function is the toggle delete attribute button click. So that same toggle that brought the window up, it'll also remove the window from the user interface. And then the function to run on confirm is going to be the actual delete attribute function, which will run those other two functions and the state. So if we go back up here, this is going to be a callback that'll be used when the confirm button is actually clicked. We're going to delete the attribute data in the database first. We're going to get the lexicon from the lexicon state, delete the attribute by ID, which the attribute selected is going to be a state that holds the ID of the attribute that has been selected on the table. And then the remainder is just to update all the states that correspond to this system. So setting the lexicon state after we've modified it, setting the attribute selected to false so that our edit and delete button will go away, and then also setting the delete attribute button click to false so that the modal will go away. Because once the attribute is deleted, then we don't want an attribute to be selected and we don't want the modal to be appearing. So I also have the cancel button, so we can click the cancel button and we'll get out of there. But if I click this again, it's going to delete fatty disappears, the edit button disappears, the modal disappears. The only thing that I might add to this is some sort of confirmation message just to say, hey, the attribute fatty was deleted from the database successfully, because right now I'm just having it be deleted from the table, and that's not extremely noticeable unless they're looking at that specifically and they remember where that attribute was within the table that's rendered. But yeah, that's all I have for today. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll be back on Wednesday, probably talking about the same delete button for reference. See ya.